Here we go, day 15, Ed Puzzle. Thank you very much for a really great class. I learned a lot last class, and that's always my favorite when I come out of there being like, wow, I learned more than when I came in. So thank you all for really giving your best. So here we go, everyone. So we've been kind of looking at this chart for kind of the history of kind of early machlok, and I just want to kind of make sure we all know where we are. So the way kind of we as a class are trying to understand things is that while there's machloket is created because of the hierarchy between how Adam and Eve are created, Adam first, Eve second, especially in light of the fact that the first creation story has them being equal. That hierarchy creates some kind of tension either between them, tension between Eve and God, tension between Eve needing more. Um, According to the way Aaron Zoo, and I'd like to use that as our official kind of understanding as a class, that God kind of learns from kind of, oh, I created a mistake by making number two kind of lesser. That kind of hierarchy doesn't exist. What if I do it the other way? What if I create the number two who kind of feels lesser? What if I create them to be greater? Will that kind of even the playing field? Will that kind of get away, take machloket away? And lo and behold, there is still machloket for other reasons, and God very much is part of creating that machloket because of accepting one and rejecting another. Interesting enough, right in the Joseph story, we see that at least that message of accepting or preferring one over the other has not kind of made its way to Jacob. After that, it feels like God is saying, you know what? I got to figure out a way to make sure that machloket doesn't exist at all because I can't control it. Maybe I'm even part of it. Maybe like it's a, how do I get rid of it? Let me find someone who is completely obedient, who kind of will not question anything that I do, and it seems like, oh, this is a great thing, right? I found someone who will do everything that I do. And even though our perspective is this really the person, like, wouldn't we rather Noah be a machloket maker and maybe kind of ask God, can you question whether we really need to destroy the entire world right now? Noah doesn't at all. And then we've looked at I think the Tower of Babel for us as a group is, although I'm trying to claim that this is a place of uber obedience, like a place where what happens when everyone is the same. I think there's a little bit of disagreement in the class, but I think the way I want us to understand this is like, if Noah is a case of obedience of one person obeying, we're going to say Tower of Babel is a case of what happens when an entire society obeys, not God, but obeys each other, and kind of what that does. And I think David kind of brought up the idea. It's a loss of individuality, loss of kind of freedom of expression, loss of kind of the self in for the sake of unity. And that unity, I guess it could be for a good thing, but here in the Tower of Babel, it's seen as a bad thing. The unification, the kind of the obedience of one person to another is something that God is kind of like, oh my goodness, this actually has been a bad thing. So what I thought, by starting with Noah and going to the Travel of Babel, I thought that would be actually a good thing. Would get rid of machloket. That has actually brought machloket as well. So like over obedience is a bad thing as well. And then we get to Abraham, and at least what we've seen so far, and I think what we've seen is that we have to actually look at Abraham in two different places. Place number one is Abraham at Sodom and Amorah, and what have we figured out from there? That is a case where actually God is almost turning to Abraham because God wants to see Abraham as a what? But right, as a right, and that's that's going to be our first question of the day, and then we're going to see Abraham at the Akedah in a very different way than he is in Sodom and Amorah, and of course we have to ask kind of why that is. So kind of that's where we are right now, and right, and really the question we ended class was, once a machloket maker, always a machloket maker. So here we are at the Akedah. Now, first of all, I want to mention right off the bat that that the Akedah is a really important story, and we're only going to be looking at it through the lens of Abraham as yes machloket maker, Abraham as no machloket maker, completely obedient, agreeing with everything God says, or completely disobedient, rejecting everything that God says. That's the only lens we're going to look at it, even though I realize that we could probably have an entire semester just on the Akedah story. And one of the things specifically that oh my goodness, that Eitan brought up. Oh, there's a poem we read on Rosh Hashanah, which I happen to have actually learned this year. So that's crazy, Eitan, that you know that, and I just learned it this year. This poem called Ha'oked v'Ne'akad v'Hamizbeach, the one who's bound, the one who is bound, the one who is binding, the one who is bound, and the altar. And Eitan said, oh, in this poem, there are some signs that actually it's Yitzchak that wants to go through with the binding of Isaac and not Abraham. And so from there, I'm getting a sense of actually maybe Abraham is more of a machloket maker than we think he is. And I just want to show you, even though we're not going to kind of be looking at kind of the Rashis on this, I actually believe that actually Rashi also kind of points a little bit of this, like kind of brings up the sense of maybe actually Abraham is a machloket maker, even though we're just going to look at the text, but I still just want to bring it up. So I'm going to bring it up, and then I'm going to ask you to forget about it. So check out the first words. Now, after these things, it was that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. God said, please take your son, your only son, the one that you love, Yitzchak, and go forth to the land of Moriah and offer him up there as a sacrifice upon one of the mountains that I will tell you of. Abraham got up early in the morning. He saddled his son. He took 2 servant boys with him and Yitzchak his son. He split the wood for the sacrifice and arose and went to the place that God had told him about. So if this is all we had, the Torah itself, and I asked you, is Abraham a machloket maker? Is Abraham a non-machloket maker? What's your answer? However, now I want you to look actually at these highlighted words. Your son, your only son, the one that you love, Yitzchak. And first of all, Rashi is going to have a comment about this. And what does that, why would Rashi have a comment about these words? What's the problem that Rashi sees in the text? So tell me what that problem is. And and now we're going to look at Rashi right here. So Rashi says, your son, he, Abraham, said to God, I have 2 sons. He, God, said to Abraham, your only son. He, Abraham, said to him, God, this one is the son of his mother, and that one is the son of his mother. He, God, said to him, the one that you love. Abraham said to him, I love them both. And God said to Abraham, Yitzchak. So what do we see happening here? We see that actually Rashi believes that there is a two-sided conversation here, a sided conversation, God's part of the conversation and Abraham's part of the conversation. Now, and we're only, as the reader of the Torah, only seeing God's side of the population. But if we read between the lines a little bit, we can actually see that actually Abraham had a part of the conversation too, and that's what made God come up with the next sentence, next part of the sentence, and the next part of the sentence, and the next part of the sentence. So here we have, instead of Abraham being the person who completely agrees with everything God says, so God says, please take your son, and then Abraham saying, being a little bit of a contrarian, but I actually have 2 sons. Your only son, actually, I have an only son from one wife, Hagar, an only son from one wife, Sarah, and for each of them, they're, and then he goes, the one that you love. And Abraham says, oh, wait a second, God, I actually love both of them. And then, only then, does God say Yitzchak. So all of a sudden, we're getting a hint. And I think that's Eitan was also bringing this up as well. It's like, are you sure that Abraham is a 100% non-machloket maker? Maybe there are hints within the text of Abraham actually saying, God, are you sure what you're doing is a good idea? Maybe we shouldn't do it. But again, so now I want you to forget about that, even though I love this Rashi. I want you to forget about it because I want us to see this more of a text of Abraham as 100% non-machloket maker. And then I want to ask, why it is the case. So let's keep on going with the text itself. I'll just keep on reading. So grab some milk and cookies. On the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Abraham said to his servants, "You stay here with the donkey, and I and the boy wish to go yonder. We wish to bow down, and then we will return to you." Abraham took the wood for the sacrifice. He placed them upon Yitzchak his son. In his hands he took the fire and the knife. In this way the two of them walked together. Yitzchak said to Abraham his father, "Father." He said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "Here's the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the sacrifice?" Abraham said, "God will make sure there is a lamb for the sacrifice, my son." In this way the two of them walked together. They came to the place that God had told him of. There Abraham built a sacrifice site and arranged the wood and bound his son Yitzchak, placed him on the sacrifice site atop the wood. Abraham stretched out his hand. He took the knife to kill his son, but the messenger called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." He said, "Hineni, here I am." He said, "Al tishlach et yadcha." Do not stretch out your hand against the boy. Do not do anything to him, for now I know that you are Yirat Elohim. You are a God-fearer. You have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Abraham lifts up his eyes and saw, and behold, a ram was caught behind in the thicket by its thorns. Abraham went up. He took the ram, offered it up as a sacrifice in place of his son. Abraham returned to his servants. They arose and they went together to Beersheba. Abraham stayed in Beersheba. So, why the silence? Why does Abe go along with this? Give me your best guess answer before we look at Richard Elliott Friedman's, right, who asked the question in what Luca read at the end of class. So, why the silence? Give me your best answer. So Richard Elliott Friedman is going to come up with two answers to this question. So please go ahead and read the first one from this page, and then go ahead and evaluate it as well. So read and then say, what do you think of this as an answer? Okay. Next answer comes from also um, also Richard Elliott Friedman. This is answer number 2. Why? And evaluate the answer. And then also tell me, of these two answers, which do you like more? Um, okay, so now we can actually go ahead and tell the story of God and the Machloket through two stories of Abraham. We have Abraham at Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abraham at the Akedah. And in both cases, right? So we see kind of what happening. Okay. Now I want to look specifically at, so we end our study in a sense of seeing machloket, a quest for obedience, what that too much obedience is a bad thing. Then we're going back to a machloket maker, but then in the Akedah story, it seems that we've gone back to an Abraham who is a non-machloket maker. So in a way, we haven't have we really come to a sense of, is machloket an important thing or not? And so I think we end with a little bit of a doubt, a little bit of a suffix. Now, and that is why I want to actually bring up another part of the story, kind of a Akedah 2.0. And what do I mean by Akedah 2.0? I want us to look for a moment at the subversive sequel, at this book called Subversive Sequels in the Bible, how biblical stories mine and undermine each other. And Judy Klitzner's, and we brought her up before, and I love her book so much. And one of the things her big claim is that when we read the Torah, sometimes there are later stories in the Torah that talk about a story that already was and actually change it in some way so that the reader understands that our view of that story should change and our understanding of that story should change, or our understanding about how God understands and God's desires should change as well. So the first question is, how do we find the Akedah's subversive sequel? So Klister is going to complain. Klister is going to claim that the way we find a subversive sequel is we look at parallels or connections between one text and another. And so here's what Judy Klitzner says. In the case of the Akedah, we're met with a happy ending in which God and man are in harmony. Yet we remain troubled by the very premise on which the story is based. So, what is it that actually troubles us about the story of the Akedah? What troubles us? And Judy Klitzner brings up two ideas. What are your two ideas? What are the two things that trouble you about the story of the Akedah? And here are her answers. God is making an unethical demand on Abe to kill his son. And B, Abe is completely obedient without any question. Okay? Those are the problems that she comes up with. And so now she says, let's search for a story that in some way connects to the story of the Akedah. And we can find it by seeing if there are words in the Akedah story that make us think about another story in the Bible. And that's exactly what she does. And I'm just going to take you very quickly through her idea, because she is going to believe that the Akedah story is connected with the story called the Book of Job, which comes much later in the Bible. So here we go. Here are her connections. So, number one, she says, if we go through the entire story of the Akedah, right at the end, after this part, Abraham returns to his servant and arose and went to Beersheba. Abraham stared at Beersheba. Look at what the next two psukim have to say. Sometime later, Abraham was told, Milcah too had borne children to your brother Nahor. Uz, the firstborn, and Buz, the son, the brother, and Kemuel, the father of Aram, and Chedesh, Chazo, Pildash. So all of these names for some reason. But then she says, wait a second. Look at those two names right there, Uz and Chesed, related to the people of Chasdim, right? And then she looked in the book of Job and she realized, and so where's the book of Job in the Torah? Which of these books would it be in? Kind of read the explanation of which one you think it would be in. And oh, there it is right there, the book of Job. And even though the book of the Akedah story, the binding of Isaac, is in Bereshit in the Torah. And check this out. So here we have Uz and Chesed, and in the first, here's the first lines of the book of Job. And if we line these up between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, where do we see hints of those words Uz and Chesed? In which lines would they be? Oh, there we go. Uz and yeah, Chesed's not there. Sorry. And here's one more hint. Oh, early in the morning, when Abraham got up early in the morning, look at that. Rising, Job would send word and sanctify them and rise early in the morning. Here we have that word chesed again. Look, and part of the story says a Chaldean formation of three columns made raids on camels. That's going to come up a little bit later in the story. That's another one. Now I know that you fear God. This was said at the end of the story. And look at that. There was a man, and where do we see kind of this idea of fearing God in this story? Do you see it anywhere? What line would it be on? Up, and there it is right there. Fearing God. Look, and look what Judy Klitzner says. Abraham and Job are the only two individual biblical characters to be defined either by the text or by God as God fearing. Whoa, that's a big connection. Basically, Judy Klitzner is saying when we read the book of Job, there are all these connections to someone who knows the Torah really, really well. And they're almost saying, hey, remember as you're reading the book of Job, remember the Akedah story. Remember that there's connections enough between them that we're supposed to have that in our mind as we read the book of Job. And one final comment comes from Rashi's comment on the words after these things. So go look that up right now and summarize what Rashi is saying there. So first of all, what I really need to know is this: who are the characters in kind of the story that Rashi brings up, and what are they arguing about, and what is the claim of the person who's arguing with God? Okay, and a hint is it's not Abraham is arguing with God; it's someone else. Okay, And now let's look at this from the very beginning of the book of Job. One day the angels came to present themselves. This is from the book of Job. One day the angels came to present themselves before God. Satan also came with them. God said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered God, "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it." Then God said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and turns away from evil." Satan replied, "Of course Job fears you. Look at everything he gets." Satan replies, "You've put a protective fence around him and his household and everything he has. You've blessed the work of his hands so that his flock and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything that Job has, and he will surely curse you to your face." So God said to Satan, "Very well, then everything he has is in your power to do. Just don't lay a finger on Job himself." So how is this part of the Job story similar to what Rashi says right here? Tell me what's similar about those two stories, and um and and this final comment from Judy Klissner: "The number of similarities between the two stories is striking, but what are we to make of all the connections? As we have seen, the Bible is in constant the Bible, in its constant replaying of stories, invites comparisons and interpretations of certain passages in light of others." So, the question that we have to now explore is, what are the similarities and differences between the book of Job and the story of the binding of Isaac? And to answer this question, we need to hear the entire story of the book of Job. And I think this is a long piece, but it's got 11 minutes, and I think I'll reserve this for class. And what we'll do the first thing in class is to kind of ask the question, what are the similarities about these two stories, and what are the differences about these two stories? Okay, so this means, what are we going to be doing at our next class? We are going to kind of finish up our unit on machloket in the beginning of the Torah by looking at how the story of Job may may rewrite the story of the Akedah. And remember, we finished looking at the Akedah of saying, here is an example of God, of Abraham no longer being like the machloket maker of Sodom and Amorah, but being much more like Noah. Okay. And I'm sure there are many ways that we can kind of justify that, right? Maybe there's even saying, well, you know what, actually, what Abraham is teaching us is that sometimes we need to be a machloket maker, and sometimes we need to not be a machloket maker, and we need to know the difference between the two. And it's not all like 100% this or 100% that, but actually, what really God wants in the world is someone who can say, when is the right time for this? When is the right time for that? When is it time to make machloket, and when is it time to keep our mouth shut? I guess. And then the larger question is, why, but why in that instant, and why not in that instant? And then Richard Friedman kind of decides that. But we're not. Okay, that's one idea. But Judy Klitzner is going to say, actually, no. Let's look at the book of Job as actually an attempt to rewrite and reread and re-understand the proper way of being during the Akedah story. So until next time.